Hello and welcome to April in our bright and sunny MARC garden. This month is being illustrated by the talented Lisa, most colourfully, and I will be telling you a story of a forest of food. Once, not far from here, but a very long time ago, there was a village. And in this village, there lived all the usual characters, plus a tailor and a woodcarver who made beautiful bowls and sometimes sculptures. Now, these two, they lived together. The woodcarver had been grown up in the village all his life, and he'd had a spare room when the tailor had come to village away from the town for a quieter life he'd said he was after. And for a reasonable rent, these two now lived together and they got on quite companionably. However, although the tailor said he'd come for a quieter life, and he was good at his job, fixing everyone's clothes, this meant he got to meet everyone in the village, and he was quite a gossip. He'd talk to people while he was fixing their clothes, and then he'd pass things on and he'd hear something else, and then he'd pass this along. Although he was new to the village, very soon the tailor knew everything there was to know about anyone. This wasn't a harm in and of itself. But one day, the woodcarver, in order to bolster his income and the meagre money he got from selling his carvings, he did, like most villagers, go out into the woods to trap some animals. He would lay little rabbit snares, he would put his nets out into the river, he would pick fruits and berries where he could. This was usual to add to the dinner table. The tailor didn't, having no real awareness of what there could be in the forest, having come from a much larger city. And one day, as the woodcarver was looking through the forest, picking things here and there, checking his traps, he saw a hollow tree, and he saw some disturbed leaves, and he saw a crack in the bark. And he went forwards, and he found, inside a hollow tree in the centre of the forest, a pot of gold. Wonderful, brilliant, beautiful. With this, he could, well, so long as he was sensible with it, he could be comfortable for the rest of his life. He'd always be able to afford his rent. If something terrible happened and the roof was broken, he'd be able to fix it. I mean, all of the security a pot of gold like this could buy. How fortunate he was to have found it. And then, looking at this shining pot of gold, each one like a golden flower or a sun, his smile began to dim. Because he realised if he took this pot of gold home, even if he managed to sneak in while the tailor wasn't looking and managed to hide it under the floorboards, if he was going out to market regularly with a golden coin, if the tailor saw his finances weren't changing and yet he was comfortable, he'd find out about the gold, and then everyone in the village would know about the gold. It was just the way of things, and if everyone in the village knew, then the lord of the village would know. And of course, the forest technically belonged to the lord. And so if he found out that he had found gold in that forest, the lord would say, "That gold is mine, it is mine, give it to me," and his fortune would be forfeit. And there was no way around it. He knew the tailor wouldn't be able to keep his mouth shut. What could he do? And then the woodcarver, well, he had an idea. And so he put that pot of gold back into the tree, covered it over with some leaves, laid up a bit more bark, just to make sure that that pot of gold was hidden even better than when he'd found it. And he retraced his steps back. And he'd left the woods earlier than he would have normally, and so market was still going on. He went into the town, passed through some of the market stalls, and he headed to the butcher's. And he had, a little bit of change of his own. He went into the butcher's and he said, "Can I get 3 strings of your finest sausages, please?" Yeah, absolutely. Deal was struck. He went away with the sausages. And he went back home and he hid the sausages and he thought. And he had to plan until was exactly right. The next day he headed out into the woods again and he checked his traps. Perfect. There were 2 rabbits caught in separate traps. He took one to take home, and the other he hid. He carried it, slung over his back. He went towards the river. He checked his nets, and perfect. There were several fish, beautiful, golden and brown and gleaming iridescent skins. And so he took, again, one of the fish and the 2 others that he got out of that trap. He traced his way back into the woods and he found the rabbit snares. And he trapped the fish into the rabbit snares, tying them around their tails. And he took one of those rabbits back to the net, lying in the river. And he'd killed it already. He flung that rabbit into the net and sank it back into the waters. And now, last but not least, he went back almost towards the edge of the forest, back near the house, and he climbed a tree. And when he was up in the tree, he got one of those string of sausages out and he tied it around one of the branches and dangled the string of sausages down. And then he got the next string and he went over a slightly higher branch, cut it in 2, dangled one there, spliced another between some branches. Perfect. He climbed back down the tree and surveyed his work. And then, taking that other fish and rabbit, he went back home. Showed the tailor that he'd got some food, gutted, skinned, left them there. He said, and while they sat down that evening, the tailor and the woodcarver, to a hearty meal, he said, I know I often go hunting by myself, but this evening I could do with your help. The tailor said, my help? Oh, I don't know anything about the woods. I'll crack branches and, scare the animals away. I'm sure I could be no help. He said, no, this evening I need your help. I'm quite good, but I need an extra pair of hands. It's sausage season. The sausages are nearly ripe, and I need your help picking them all before they're overripe and we've lost the harvest. Sausage season? Yeah. I've never heard of sausage season before. Why, it's a matter of course round here. There's a couple of trees, and one of them, everyone knows that's the one that I go to. It's not far from the house, but you barely get a day or 2 for sausage season. I saw them budding yesterday while I was getting this food, and by tonight, Moonlight's the best time to harvest sausages. By tonight, they will be plump and fat, and if we don't get them, by the time I go out tomorrow, they'll have split their seams and rotted onto the forest floor. It's a terrible shame to miss the sausage harvest. The tailor, well, okay, yes, of course. I mean, you provide good food for both of us. I'd be happy to help. Still, I've never heard of it. Wake me when it's time. And he went to bed early. And the woodcarver, well, he sat up for an hour or 2 and he waited. And then he went and he woke the tailor. He said, now, look, the moon is just climbing in the sky. It's the perfect time for sausages. And they went out together into the forest. And it was so dark, they could barely see, waiting for the moon to break through the tree branches. But the tailor's eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom. And then the woodcarver said, there, can you see? And they headed towards the sausage tree. And there, to the tailor's surprise, hanging from the branches were plump, thick strings of sausages. I've never seen such a thing. Here, quick, help me. And the woodcarver reached up and plucked some sausages. Said, you try as well. And the tailor shimmied up some branches, climbed upside down along the branch and pulled strings of sausages from the sky. And they brought them down, and the woodcarver, he opened his bag and they put them in. He said, brilliant. Let's go home. I'm freezing. And the carver said, no, since we're out here already, we better check the rest of the traps. You never know what you might catch. Leave it open for the animals at dawn. Oh, do we have to? Come on. And so together, the tailor and the woodcarver walked into the forest, and what did they come to but the rabbit snares? The rabbit snares that were full of fish? My, how did a fish get in these traps? I mean, there's been no storm, maybe a bird dropped. The tailor could not understand it, but the woodcarver turned and looked at him as if he was mad. What do you mean, how did they get here? This is the breeding cycle of the fish. Every year they swim upriver and then they before they lay their eggs, they crawl out on their fins and they crawl up the banks and they come here to eat some of the berries from these lower bushes. They lay some eggs and then they crawl back into the water. I'm lucky to have caught 2, actually. That's quite a good harvest. Here, help me take them or skin them back home. Landfish. The fish that crawl on their... I've never heard of such a thing. Why, I have moved to a very strange area, said the tailor. But together they continued, last but not least, through the forest to the edge of the river, where the woodcarver hauled up his nets. And what did they find inside? But a rabbit. Fur, wet and plump and damp inside the net, and the tailor, oh, the poor thing, it must have leapt off the bank and gotten drowned and caught in your nets. The woodcarver, again, looked at him like this was the most foolish thing he'd ever heard. Fallen into the nets? It's a river rabbit. River rabbit swim upstream every year. This is where the best fish are to eat. You know how much rabbits love to eat fish. A river rabbit. Yes, look, you can see under that fur, much plumper, much bigger than the land rabbits. Oh, we're going to eat well this week. Again, the tailor found this hard to believe, but he'd never seen such things before. They took the rabbit, they took the fish, they took the sausages. And as they turned to head for home, the woodcarver turned as if his eye had just been caught. He said, "Does something look off about that tree to you over there?" "No, it's a dead tree. No, something's disturbed in that bark. Give me a moment." And he headed over to the tree and he started to pull aside the bark and the leaves, and then, look, a pot of gold. I don't know how it came to be here, but oh, we're so fortunate. The woodcarver turned and looked at the tailor. "You must tell no one of this. You know the Lord would take it off us if he heard anything about it. If we want to hold on to this fortune, it must be a secret." And the tailor nodded ardently. Of course, I wouldn't say anything." "Help me carry it home." And now, fully laden down, the woodcarver and the tailor headed back through the forest and back to their house. They laid all of the food out on the table, and watching until the tailor's back was turned, the woodcarver lifted up a corner of a floorboard and began to hide the gold in several different locations around the house. He left a little bit out, for shopping. He's sharing the fortune, just making sure he can't show anyone where it is. And then they all lived happily ever after. Oh, wait, no, that's not how it goes, because they lived happily ever after for a week or 2 weeks. But the tailor, well, as he was fixing some clothes, he got to talking, and he was so full of their good fortune. Someone looked, they said, "Oh, what nice thread you've got." He goes, "Thank you, it's new." And they look and they go, "And those shoes too you're wearing?" And he goes, "Yeah, they're new." "Have you really been doing such good business? You're able to afford such finery?" He says, "Good business. I've come into good fortune. My roommate, the woodcarver, he found a pot of gold in the forest. But you mustn't tell anyone. I'm only telling you because you're my best friend," he said to a random client whose clothes he was fixing. The client said, "Absolutely, of course, I wouldn't tell anyone." And by the end of the day, it was all round the village. And by the end of that week, it had, of course, reached the ears of the Lord, who called both of them before him. He sent his own men to knock at the door, seize the woodcarver and the tailor, and say, "You are coming to explain yourselves to the Lord." And they were brought before the Lord, and the tailor looked scared, and the woodcarver looked confused. "What is this about, my lord? Do you wish to buy a bowl?" "No, I don't wish to buy a bowl. I have heard that you found a pot of gold in the forest. You know that all of those lands are mine, and therefore anything found on them is also mine. Hand it over." Pot of gold? "My lord, if I had found a pot of gold, do you think I'd still be dressed like this? Do you think I'd still be living with this man?" My fortunes have not changed, sire." "Don't lie to me. Everybody has heard the tailor telling them that you found a pot of gold." The tailor, who listening to the words of the... "No offence, my lord, he is my roommate, but he's a little simple in the head, and it's a terrible gossip. He makes up fantasies. I won't believe a word he says. Nonsense. He's as able a man as you or I. Tailor, I command you to tell me exactly how it came to be that you found this pot of gold. The tailor said, absolutely, my lord, of course. It was the night of the sausage harvest. On the night of the sausage harvest, the woodcarver took me out to help him pick all of the sausages before they rotted onto the ground. There is no such thing as a sausage harvest. But the tailor continued. After we had collected the sausages, we went to check the traps, of course, and as we walked, we found that the fish had come ashore to lay their eggs for the season. The fish had come ashore. How, pray tell, did they do that? And the tailor looked at them like they were simple. Well, it's obvious they crawled up on their fins out of the stream. People now were shaking their heads and laughing as the tailor continued. And then, of course, we went to go and check the traps. And we went to check the nets in the stream, and there we found we had caught a river rabbit. A river rabbit. Yes, because it was time for them to swim upstream. And after this bountiful catch, then the woodcarver, he saw a hollow tree. He went over and he pulled aside bark and leaves, and he found the pot of gold, sire. By this moment, the Lord turned. Everyone assorted had heard this. He was embarrassed to have ever taken the tailor seriously. And he turned to the woodcarver. He said, I apologise. Clearly the man's a fool. Good luck in living with him. For the rest of your life, should your fortunes not change. Get out of here. I'm tired. I'm sorry I wasted any time on this. And so the woodcarver and the tailor headed home. The tailor was embarrassed. I can't say he ever completely learned his lesson, but he certainly kept a little quieter after that. And the woodcarver, well, every month, for every year of the rest of his life, he could always find a little hidden coin of gold somewhere around the house, and he lived comfortably from that day to this. Thank you for joining me here in the MARC Garden, and I look forward to May's story next month.